The following story is also available as a read-only version. Check the link in the description if you're interested. This short story is part of A Day in the Life of Hugo Hendricks. It consists of 4 stories, which should be read in no particular order, and were released in an order determined by a random number generator. I strongly encourage you to read the other 3 after this one to get a full picture of what this collection is about. They can be found on my blog, whoisbetty.com, or as audio narrations on the Who is Betty YouTube channel. At 6 in the morning, the screeching alarm jerked Hugo out of his sleep. Like a robot, he sat upright in his bed and opened his eyes. From the cloud-colored concrete walls to the alabaster glass window glowing with the first sunlight of the day, everything was white. It was a reminder of his nature, his purpose, his duty. First in his routine were the morning acknowledgements. Setting his feet on the cold, hard floor, he grabbed a copy of the Code of Conduct from the night desk. Without even looking, he opened it on the right page. Hugo knew every word in it by heart. After all, he read it front to back every evening, and it was reconditioned into his mind every week on Brotherhood Day, where he did nothing but training and acknowledging. He had 20 minutes from the alarm until joining his brothers, and every second of it was the same, every single day. Hugo grabbed his Cat-O Nine-Tails. Despite being power cleaned regularly, it had adopted a noticeably rose shade over the years. It was the only speck of color in his entire cell, and considered a mark of his veterancy. There was a saying among white knights: the redder the tails, the better the males. Kneeling, his face toward the window, Hugo recited the first verse of the morning acknowledgements. I acknowledge being a straight, white, cis male, and the inherent privilege that comes with it. With an almost mechanical jerk of his arm, he let the cotton thongs thunder down on his scar-covered back. Like wasp stings, they ate into his skin, but the pain was manageable. He had grown resilient with time. One hit just didn't do it anymore. I acknowledge that, by nature of that privilege, I have received and continue to receive advantages from the patriarchy, white supremacy, and the uncounted systems of discrimination that accompany them. The power of the acknowledgements brought the guilt under his skin to a boil. It was looking for a way out, and the pressure was so agonizing that the lash of his whip became a relief. I acknowledge that these evils must be purged from society, and that they have been imprinted onto the human soul by thousands of years of scum dominating the world. I also acknowledge that, by virtue of being a straight white cis male, I am actively contributing to the relentless furthering of these evils, no matter what I do. Another lash, and his skin finally cracked. It was liberating to feel the guilt hissing out of him like steam from a pressure cooker. I acknowledge that I am forever corrupted by these forces, and nothing I do can ever make me into a positive member of society. The only way for me to be redeemed of my corruption is to give my life to the Order, in service eternal and unending, unquestioning of the authority of the catechists, and to become an obedient tool of the ecclesiasticum. His disgusting, inferior white blood ran from the wounds, airing out his evil nature while blanketing him in warm comfort at the same time. I acknowledge that it is only by the infinite grace of the ecclesiasticum I am allowed to live, and that it is my sole purpose to carry out its will. I praise the superiority of the ecclesiasticum to anything that came before it, and swear to protect all aspects of it with every fiber of my being. For only the ecclesiasticum can preserve us from falling back into the immoral patterns of the past, and only the ecclesiasticum can combat the dark forces that our souls have internalized. Letting out a grunt of rage, he whipped himself as hard as he possibly could, executing the lash with a degree of force and precision only specialized musculature, built up over years of experience, could muster. It felt amazing, like pus draining from a festering wound. But the fact that it did was only due to him having privilege to be cleansed in the first place. Those disadvantaged by society never got to feel such pleasure, which again was a kind of privilege on its own. I pledge allegiance to the ecclesiasticum, its catechists, and the higher races guiding its path. In acknowledgement of my inherent faults, I put my soul into the hands of the absolute and uncompromising pursuit of human betterment, safety, and equality. The last lash hit, and Hugo wanted so many more. He wanted to kneel, furiously beating his back in a wild frenzy. He wanted to feel his tainted blood flow out of him until he was entirely purified, until the guilt was gone, until it stopped clawing at him from the inside. But alas, the order demanded discipline and strict adherence to the laws, and the catechists demanded he use his body to serve the ecclesiasticum. Hugo washed the cat in his sink and hung it back on the wall. A white tray had been placed before his white cell, and on it were a small white cup of white nectar and a white tube filled with white gel. He downed the nectar and began applying the gel to his back with a rubber spatula. The nectar would keep him strong, focused, and physically healthy by aiding tissue regeneration, breaking up fat reserves, clearing nervous pathways, and minimizing activity in unnecessary centers of the brain. Meanwhile, the gel would mend his back, calm irritations, and prevent infection. All wounds would be closed by the end of breakfast. Wearing only white cloth trousers, Hugo made his way to the dining hall, where more and more of his brothers were trickling in and sitting down on the benches. The lack of tops was mainly so the healing gel could do its work unhindered, but it was also an opportunity to see who had acknowledged with the most vigor this morning. Showing off one's scars was a good method to gain respect among white knights. The only fully clothed brothers were elders, patrolling up and down between the tables, bringing bowls of nutrient pulp to the new arrivals. Hugo was still 23 years away from his own eldering, at age 50, and he wasn't sure if he wanted to get there. Elders only got to whip themselves on Brotherhood Day, where they led the ceremonies. Most of the time, they ran the monastery when the younger brothers were out fighting for the ecclesiasticum. They cleaned rooms and facilities, repaired broken equipment, assisted the handlers, coordinated with ordnance dispatchers, scheduled routines, and trained new generations of white knights. According to the catechists, they had paid their due to the ecclesiasticum, and their commitment now lay entirely with the order for their last 15 years. Aged 65, they would be forgiven all their privilege and be given the final cleansing. Hugo sat down next to Abel Malloy, who was already enjoying his breakfast. He and Abel had been friends all their life, having grown up in the monastery together. One of the elders even said that they were from the same village originally, but neither of them remembered. "Have you heard, Hugo? A catechist will come tomorrow and present us with a new handbook to detect microaggressions," reveled Abel as a brother passed a bowl of pulp and a spoon to Hugo. "I'll learn it by heart, but I hope they refine our conditioning with it. It isn't our place to make decisions. If we detect a microaggression, our response should be automatic, not tainted by our privileged minds," Hugo responded. "Do you truly not believe we can overcome our nature, brother?" "I follow the catechisms. That is my duty." He ate a spoonful of nutrient pulp. "Anything beyond that is bound to be problematic. Truth be told, Abel, if these thoughts persist, you should ask the handlers to condition them out of you. I dare not judge, but the idea we have a right to overcome our natures sounds to be a product of our privilege-accustomed minds to me." "That is not something I had considered." Abel pointed his spoon at Hugo. "Thank you for checking my privilege, brother." "Any time." At 7 sharp, the White Knights were in full gear. Light body armor of hardened Kevlar, cut-resistant balaclavas, and lightweight longcoats affording optimal protection without impairing movement, all of it completely white, of course. Though trained to use anything in their environment, including firearms if need be, they only carried a transparent acrylite baton attached to their wrists by a rubber band. They were sitting in the monastery's ready room, waiting to receive their assignments for the day. Normally, these consisted of guarding important members of the ecclesiasticum, standing guard in relevant public spaces, or going on patrol with the ordnance. Sometimes, however, they stormed drug labs and brothels, controlled mobs of those whose mind had been infected with heresy, and gave chase to dangerous individuals. Military parades also took place on occasion. Today, the Inquisition had requisitioned a force of 8 white knights. Hugo and Abel were among them. They stepped out onto the landing platform. The monastery was a fortress atop a skyscraper, and out here one could overlook almost the entire city of Harriet. From the patches of grass green and corn yellow on the horizon, to the mega towers of the city centre soaring high into the cobalt sky, everything was sparkling in the rising sun. The higher races resided up there, where being outside caused difficulty breathing. The ravines and chasms of buildings below were filling with morning traffic, their walls aglow with hollow posters advertising the ecclesiasticum and its institutions. Personnel carriers the colour of porcelain were waiting for them. Each was emblazoned with a stylized white knight, holding his baton in front of his face with both hands, the symbol of the order. Strapping himself in, Hugo was getting excited. Working for the Inquisition could only mean one thing: heretics. This was the most important work possible for a white knight. Cleansing the grime of the patriarchy off the face of the earth was gratifying, and important to preserve the ecclesiasticum. With a muffled howl, the 6 propeller jets on the sides of the carrier lifted it off the platform. The craft tilted ever so slightly, and they moved forward. Without windows or screens, it was impossible to tell how long the flight would take, or where they were even going. On any other mission, the Knights would have been shown a short briefing video with basic intel on the area of operations. But as so often with the Inquisition, the displays remained deactivated, and there was nothing to do but wait. They were too important to concern themselves with the well-being of lowly white males. It was a long journey, half an hour at least, and when they finally touched down and the ramp was lowered, a tall man dressed in the robes of an inquisitor was awaiting them at the foot. Hugo lowered his shoulders, adopting a more respectful demeanor, not only because of the man's office, but because of his race. The Inquisitor had eyes that sparkled like rubies, indigo skin, a bald head, and the onset of wrinkles on his round face. He wore a salmon-colored dress shirt with a black vest and coat, with a thorn-framed eye embellished into the leather on his back. On his left arm, he wore the pink armband of the ecclesiastical party. He was a blue, one of the higher races, created to surpass and overcome the baggage and internalized oppression carried by those oppressed by the white race. With him was a young, female-looking person of color wearing almost identical apparel, though she lacked the armband. She had smoke-gray eyes, and her hair was bound in a simple ponytail. She was not a full inquisitor, but an apprentice to the position. "Greetings, white knights." The blue's voice was a soft whisper, yet clearly audible. "I am Inquisitor Murillo. I have requested your services today. This is Shauna Kang. Follow her orders as you would mine." Hugo knelt before them, and his brothers followed suit. He was unworthy of being spoken to like this. Commands were the only thing he was used to hearing from members of the Inquisition. "Rise," said the Inquisitor. "I have no time for such nonsense. Follow." Now that he had demonstrated his submission, Hugo allowed himself to survey his surroundings. They were in a field, at the edge of a forest. Nearby were no fewer than 5 ordnance carriers. Officers swarmed around the makeshift encampment. Most were lightly armed wardens that one would see patrolling the city, but shock troopers in heavy armor and even some snipers were also present. Behind them was a small village consisting of brick houses, surrounding a large, round building made of plaster and sandstone fitted into a wooden frame. Dark clouds had assembled in the sky, and Hugo spotted a few of the city's outlying skyscrapers in the distance. More ordnance troopers were in the town proper, patrolling between houses with rifles, batons, and taser guns. Their commander, a male-looking person of the Asian race, was waiting by the door of the large building at the town center. Like the Inquisitor, he wore the pink armband of the party on his highly decorated crimson uniform. There were no villagers in sight, and the curtains on all windows were closed. "Area's locked down, no attempted flights." He handed Inquisitor Murillo a tablet computer. "This is the full list of inhabitants, last updated on a routine inspection 10 months ago." "What about genetic signatures?" the Inquisitor asked. "Incomplete. The last inventory was 4 years ago, and even then only a quarter of them were processed." "Very well," whispered Murillo. He turned to the huge wooden portal of the central building. "Everybody stay back. Lower your weapons," he instructed the ordnance. "You and you, with me," he added, pointing at Hugo and Abel. With the 2 white knights flanking him, Inquisitor Murillo approached the portal and knocked 3 times. After a few moments, one of the doors opened barely wide enough for a male to stick his head out. He was white, with small brown eyes, thick cheeks, and a graying beard reaching to his collarbone. He wore a black skull cap on his head, in addition to a charcoal kaftan. "Yes, how may I help you, Inquisitor?" he asked, his voice dripping with suspicion. "A good day to you too, Rabbi. Your village is being audited by the Inquisition. I'd have the ordnance pull every single one of your people from their houses, but I demand cooperation before resorting to force." "Why? We've done nothing wrong," the rabbi insisted. Hugo felt his hand flick immediately to the baton on his hip. This white male was questioning an inquisitor of the higher races. That required immediate and severe punishment. But he let it rest. Murillo would tell him what to do. "The Inquisition will be the judge of that. Open the door, or I will have it opened," said the Inquisitor. Reluctantly, the rabbi obliged. Most villagers were holed up in the synagogue, though a few were hiding in their homes. Abel and some ordnance troopers were sent with the rabbi to fetch them. Meanwhile, all the others were instructed to sit down in 3 orderly lines before the portal by the commander. Inquisitor Murillo called for Shauna Kang, who had 2 white knights carrying a gene sequencer in tow. One by one, the villagers were processed. Their genetic profiles matched their information. The sequencer was quick, but there were over 100 villagers, so the process would take a while. When everyone was assembled, the rabbi sat down with them, right next to where Hugo was standing. Inquisitor Murillo addressed the village to explain the reason for their audit. Though his voice was still a whisper, it penetrated to the bone even in the last row. "I do not need to explain why I'm here, because every one of you already knows. This is a tight-knit community. You know of the heretics among you, and your silence thus far has branded you all heretics as well. The Jewish race has been given a great gift by the ecclesiasticum. Though you are an offshoot of the white race, you have experienced oppression. Your whiteness makes you incapable of fully comprehending it, but we understand. Thus, we allow you to settle near our cities, because though you may be every bit as evil as the white race, you are not quite as bad. With the exception of Mizrahi Jews, which are always welcome anywhere in our great metropoli, your people are of the white race and must be prevented from oppressing." The Inquisitor was walking up and down the first row of kneelers. The sky was getting darker with clouds. "One such form of oppression is the distribution of literature not approved or expressly banned by the catechists. The Cardinal Zerself has personally instructed me to look into the great number of such works distributed around these parts as of late, and all the threads lead back to your little village. Your Excellency, Inquisitor, said Shauna Kang, this male is not Jewish. She was pointing at a brown-haired youth with blue eyes sitting in the first row. What? He asked, terror on his face. The expression of a white male caught red-handed. Is that so? The Inquisitor asked. Not a single Ashkenazi marker, and nothing Sephardi either. Looks like we found an invader. There was no amusement in the Inquisitor's voice. No, please, you don't understand. I'm Jewish. I was born here. I've always been Jewish. This is a mistake. Look over there, Invader. Murillo pointed at the distant skyline of the city. What do you see? It's the buildings, but I'm not. It is written and held true by all catechists that members of the white race are not allowed near the oppressed races and the higher races who protect them, he interrupted. By definition, a member of the white race is considered an interloper, and thus invader, when they are located in an area where a city can be seen on the horizon from the highest and most unobstructed nearby geographical feature. He turned to the villagers. You should all be insulted by this cis-white male who attempted to hide among you. He is an invader, never forget that, and we must protect ourselves from invasion. Your execution, white male, is an act of self-defense by the ecclesiasticum. Ordnance soldiers pulled the screaming and pleading white male from the crowd. Their training allowed them to see through his attempts of emotional manipulation, though the congregated Jews were now murmuring with agitation. Their white genes forced them to side with their own. The soldiers dragged the interloper toward the personnel carriers, but the Inquisitor stopped them. Not back there. Do it here, before the eyes of the village. It's important that they see the Inquisition protecting them from invaders like this one. With 2 ordnance officers restraining the white male, the commander himself pulled out his revolver and ordered them to make him kneel. The invader refused, attempting to free himself, but the officers kicked the back of his knee. Inquisitor, the man speaks the truth. His name is Herschel. I have known him from birth, the rabbi interjected. Silence, Hugo shouted reflectively, stomping his foot on the ground. The commander pointed the barrel of his gun on the back of the weeping Herschel's head. Inquisitor, please, this man is a Jew. The rabbi stood up with raised arms, and Hugo reacted. With a spin of his body, he gave the old man a powerful thigh knock, unsheathing his baton in the process, and delivering a flat hit on his neck. Before the rabbi could topple over, Hugo grabbed his shoulder, extending the baton arm, and made the weapon crash into his abdomen. Wheezing and gagging, the rabbi fell to the ground, where he curled up in pain. A bang resounded through the village, followed by a wet thump as Herschel sagged onto the grass with a hole in his head. There were moans of grief and pain in the crowd, and some children started crying as the ordnance took away the invader's body. How the Jews could bemoan the death of an invader, Hugo could not understand. They should be grateful to the ordnance for disposing of this threat. Rabbi, 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 said the Inquisitor, approaching the old man. He seemed to be looking for something on his tablet. I see you have 2 little boys. The White Knights are always on the look for new recruits. He turned to the commander. Joel and Adam Gottschalk, 5 and 7. Find them and take them. The rabbi, still writhing on the floor, tried to beg for mercy, but only retch and blood came out of his mouth. You're right, whispered Murillo. I am a merciful Inquisitor. I'll only take your youngest. The other may already have memories we can't erase. That might cause problems down the line. Instead, I will take... He looked around the crowd and pointed at another little boy. That one. No, the woman next to the child cried, grabbing the boy tight as Hugo made his advance toward them. Yes, the Inquisitor responded. Thank the rabbi for this. His baton in hand, Hugo twisted the mother's arm and kicked her away from her son, whom he grabbed and lifted up as he tried to run away. One arm over the kicking boy's chest, he carried him through the rows of villagers to the Inquisitor. The Jews looked at him with spite in their eyes, as though he were an evil man. In their vanity, they did not understand that this was how he made amends for his whiteness. 2 ordnance soldiers took the crying boy off him and put him in cuffs, then carried him away. I look around this place and I see it's quite beautiful. Your houses are in good shape. You all look very healthy, and the scroll work on the pillars on your synagogue is exquisite. The Inquisitor was once again addressing the village. It seems that you've had a lot of privilege recently. That demands for some reparations. As per the Jewish charter, I will put 5 of you on the slave roster. You know how this works, I hope. The corpocrats look for what type of people they need, place an order, and someone will come get you. So don't fret, you might not be the one who gets drafted. He typed on the tablet. You know what? I took 2 of your kids today. I'll reduce it to 4 people, 9 years. That's much better than you deserve, so don't say the Inquisition never did anything for you. He put away the tablet. Now, back to the business at hand. While we continue our genetic testing, the Ordnance will conduct a full search of your village. When we find the ones responsible for printing the heretic literature, their punishment will be harsh. The sky was dark, and a drizzle of rain began. When prevented from oppressing other races, whites did not amount to much. Their houses were simple, few of them 2-storied, and their interior wasn't too great either. Wooden furniture, disheveled clothes, prehistoric appliances, fireplaces that doubled as stoves. The power grid was barely strong enough to keep the lights on, and everybody had candles in their home for when it went out. The pride of their town was a small stationery shop, the books of which documented sales to several towns in the vicinity. They scoured every inch of the place, but did not find any heretical documents. The only printer in the shop was disassembled, and diagnostics were run on its memory chip, yielding no results. Instead, Hugo was the one to find a trap door in a wooden shed full of farming tools. He informed the commander, and was the first to breach. A steel ladder suspended in a shaft made of cinder blocks led him into an underground bunker. 5 rooms, separated by chipboard doors, encased in a coffin of poured concrete. This structure had to be from before the reckoning. 3 printers, massive beasts reaching to Hugo's chest, were in one room, and an even larger binding machine was in the next. Off a tiny commons and kitchen area, there were sleeping quarters with 4 cots. Several boxes could be found in a storeroom, most of them empty, but some filled with books. One box was open, and its contents spilled across the room as though it had been dropped in a hurry. Inside were at least 20 copies of the same book, wrapped in a simple black cover with white letters. George Orwell, Animal Farm, it said, and the box was labeled accordingly. The other boxes had different labels on them. P.D. James, The Children of Men, said one. Yevgeny Zamyatin, We, said another. A half-full box said Jack London, The Iron Heel. Heretic propaganda, it had to be. White males trying to indoctrinate the masses into serving them. Hugo shuddered at the thought of possibly having been one of these white males. To be evil and not realize it, that would have been his fate had the Ecclesiasticum not saved him. After some searching, Hugo found a secret door. A steel hatch with a box taped to it, leading into a rough-hewn tunnel of rock and dirt. It smelled of earth and mold, and thin roots hung from the ceiling. Followed by an ordnance commando with a flashlight attached to her rifle, Hugo followed it until it opened into a natural cave right by a forest clearing. There were tracks in the ground made by the large wheels of some kind of transporter. Drones were sent out immediately to follow the tracks, but the heretics were long gone. "They must have known we were coming," said the commander, after ordering his troopers to carry up the books and burn them. "No other reason they would leave this operation in such a hurry." "But how would they have known?" asked Inquisitor Murillo. "These heretics are rats, hiding in their hole, following their oppressor instinct. The villagers probably fed them, following their natural instincts. Even in our world, the white male finds a way to be a burden to other races." "Actually, 2 of the people sleeping in these cots were of the Asian race," said Shauna Kang, who was sequencing genetic material from the sleeping cots. "Another is clear Sephardi and also some Berber markers." "Must have been a silver-tongued white then, manipulating 3 people into doing his bidding like that," the commander joked. "Well, The apprentice inquisitor fell silent for a moment. "To be honest, I'm running the genetic material from the 4th card again right now," and she looked at her tablet, a frown on her face. "Yes, the 4th individual to be part of this operation was an all-person." There was a moment of silence. Hugo's eyes fixed on Inquisitor Murillo, who squinted with confusion. "Are you certain?" he asked. "The oppressed races, I can imagine, becoming victims of internalized oppression, but the higher races are impervious to the whites' mind control. This should be especially true given that no whites have been present here." "No, this is definitely all-person DNA right here, and enough to conclude that they slept in this cot for a while," said Kang. "Impossible. They must have taken them prisoner, kept them around for torturing pleasure. Nobody can say what people are capable of when under the influence of the white male." "Doesn't seem like it." There was discomfort in Kang's voice. Everyone in the room was tense. No ropes, no cuffs, no difference to the other cots, no signs of restraint, struggle, anything of the sort. Whoever this all-person was, they were here of their own accord. The air was heavy. Hugo's mind was making pirouettes. If the higher races could be corrupted by the heretic propaganda, were they truly apt for protecting civilization? He repressed the thought immediately, biting his tongue. There it was again, his whiteness, trying to destroy the ecclesiasticum so he could oppress. Inquisitor Murillo puffed, looking at the floor. A drop of sweat appeared on his bald, indigo head. "The higher races cannot be corrupted by heresy. The one in here must have been a prisoner in some sense. Make sure your reports reflect that," he ordered. "As to the village, have some transporters come over. I'm thinking they will all serve their lives on the slave roster as punishment for aiding in the production and dissemination of heretic propaganda, as well as kidnapping an individual of the higher races." "Yes, Your Excellency." The commander bowed and climbed back up the shaft to make the call. "Oh, and White Knight." Murillo turned to Hugo. "I want you and your brothers to select all the frail and elderly that would not contribute much to the slave roster and beat them to death with your batons. And make it brutal. I want these villagers to see what happens when you live a life of white privilege." "As you wish, Inquisitor." Hugo took a quick knee and walked toward the ladder. "Not the rabbi, though," the Inquisitor added. "I want him delivered to my office for some pain therapy before his execution. He's the leader of this place. He knows more about this than he lets on." "Of course, Your Excellency." If you liked this story and would like to hear more, please do subscribe to the YouTube channel. A new short story is uploaded every Wednesday, and there will occasionally be another one in between if I find the time. Thank you very much for listening and have a great day.